and today I have a fabulous creative activist with me, Cathy Lander-Goldberg. She is a St. Louis-based photographer, educator, clinical social worker, and the curator and photographer for traveling exhibition, The Resilient Souls Project, which you can see right now in Chicago at the Harold Washington Library. I am so excited to have her here today. She is also an author of Photo Explorations, A Girl's Guide to Self-Discovery Through Photography, Writing, and Drawing. Welcome, Cathy.
Thank you. Thanks for having me, Ray.
Oh, I'm really happy to have you here. So why don't we start a little bit, because the reason we connected was through your current exhibition of Resilient Souls. Can you tell us why you started it 20 years ago and what is going on today with it?
Sure. Well, 20 years ago, probably actually 20 plus, because it opened 20 years ago. So probably in the early 90s, I was doing a lot of work with both volunteering with girls, teaching photography in darkroom, and then also starting to work part-time at a school, teaching photography, teaching writing. So some of this came out of, it was a therapeutic school for at-risk kids. So some of the stories came out from me hearing so many things from girls of what they were struggling with at such a young age. So by 16 or 17, they'd already come through a lot of issues, whether it was recovering from substances or school phobia. They were doing all kinds of things already and had already learned some lessons of life that I thought, boy, if they could tell this to younger girls from their words instead of from a teacher, from an adult, that would be great. So that's where the idea from the Resilient Souls started, and just started doing it with a couple of former students to ask them would they be interested in telling their stories, writing out their stories, and I do a portrait of them, and that's how it started.
Okay, and what made you decide to follow up with them 20 years later? I think that's a really great premise. It was very interesting to me.
Sure. I mean, honestly, that photo project, I'd worked as a photographer for, many years, freelancing, and I had a portrait studio, but that was pretty much the most, the piece I'm the most proud of, the work I'm the most proud of over all these years. And even some of the photographs, some of the black and white photographs in there, I felt like one were my best work, and I wanted to keep going with it, but primarily why I wanted to do it was really to find out what happened to them and find out what their stories, how they turned out. So that's what brought me back to it. I've been meaning to do it. When you have something on your to-do list for, years and years.
Right. Well, I didn't know if there was one specific moment, there was a catalyst, somebody died or something, that spurred you to do it. So I love this. Why don't you tell us the story of Nani, and there's a couple others I'd like you to tell us about them as young women and who they are today.
Sure.
What they
Yeah, right. Nani, I met, and these are some of the Chicago women. I think I shared some of their stories with you.
Right.
Because the women are from all over the country. A lot of it started out in St. Louis, and then in Chicago's nearby city. I work with some of the agencies too. I wanted to increase the diversity, and was also out on the West Coast. Some of them were college students from the East Coast. So it goes from everywhere. But as far as Nani goes, I knew I was coming to Chicago, so I called some of the agencies in Chicago to kind of help me find people that might be interested. And I met her through Latino Youth. I don't know if they're still around, and they help. I believe it's at-risk youth in, I think it's the South Side, Chicago. It's been a lot of years. So that's how I met her. She had dropped out of high school. She had gotten into, gone down roads with substances, gotten into fights, and really the school had helped her get her life together. So that black and white photograph, there's a photograph in the exhibit, and it's also in a lot of promotions and around the library. And it's the story of her actually on the back porch of the school, and it's a black and white photograph. And she still, even though she was, really close to getting her high school diploma and had found people to help her and work with her, and she was actually a very good writer, I thought, she still looked very tough and maybe even intimidating in that photograph, I think. And but when you get to meet her, her nickname is Nani Love. and that's not her last name, but that's what everybody calls her because she's very tender and sweet and really had a lot of very soulful things to say, a lot of wisdom in her. So I did always wonder what happened to her. In fact, she was probably one of the first ones I found on social media, and I found an article from a local Chicago paper that she was now on the women's force football team. So there was a photograph of her.
Right, I read that. I thought, wow, that is so cool. Working with all these women who are strong, powerful, impactful people who can, mentor her, and probably she's a mentor
Absolutely. Now. Right. And even though she had done well when I had met her, but then she did kind of go back into old ways, had relapsed with substances at one point. But really, that really helped her get her life together. And all these years, she wanted to get a college degree, but she really just finished it probably within the last year or two, and was inspired by these other women who were her teammates and her family. And over the years, she had lost family. She'd lost a child. She lost both of her parents. But yet, and I think she lost a cousin, so she really did have a lot of loss still for a very young age. When I met her again, I think she's about 37. She's getting a little closer to 40, but I think she just turned 39. And so, really, between that and her faith, she really gets through it. And I think she has an amazing spirit, like many of these women do, for just having to deal with what life hands you, even if it's not fair.
Right. Well, speaking of not fair, let's talk about Sandy. That's such an empowering, inspiring story as well.
Sure. So Sandy, I also met through Chicago. The Chicago Rehabilitation Center had introduced us, and she already had been a social worker when I met her at 24. Most of the women in the exhibit were in their late teens or early 20s, and she was already a role model for people with disabilities. She had already, lived through. She was born as with a congenital issue. Her femur bone was removed when she was about age 4. So she had lived with one leg all through grade school, all through middle school, all through high school. And if we kind of look at, what middle school is like, there's so much in the media about what's middle school. Can you imagine what it would be like to look so different from your peers? And she did it so gracefully, and it didn't let her stop her. And she gives her parents the credit for really treating her just like all the other kids. And she kept up with them, and she went on, and that was part of her life mission, to be an athlete and to help change stereotypes for people with disabilities. So she was doing great when I met her, years ago, and she was living in Chicago on her own and training for Paralympics. And then when I found her, I think I did the same thing. I found her through our friend Google, and there was a great article about her and going to the Paralympics, and I connected with her, and she's now living in Denver, so I get a chance to go visit her. And she's married, had adopted a beautiful little boy, and is doing great. Went up to see her, and she brought out, I asked for her to bring out her medals, and as you can see in the color photograph of her, she's wearing her Paralympic medals.
Right.
And she continues to be an advocate. She had recently, when I saw her a couple of years ago, she was about to climb a volcano with a group of amputees, and they were doing this to raise money and to promote the cause, to promote that individuals should have access to prosthetics, because I know that for a lot of individuals, it's very, very expensive, and their insurance doesn't cover all that. So that's really one of her causes. And she continues. She just a couple of weeks ago, she just did another, it's called ROMP, is the organization she was working with, and they just did another climb up a mountain closer to her, I believe, in Colorado. So she's amazing, and she has an amazing spirit and is happy to be a spokesperson, and really, again, continues to change how people think of individuals with disabilities. So she's
Why
great
do you
spirit.
think it's so important to share these kind of stories?
Well, I think we can talk about it and say, oh, everybody, people with disabilities are no different than any of us. But I think when it's personal, first of all, they're handwritten, some of them. So hers in particular, I believe, is handwritten in the exhibit. It's very personal. It's like reading a letter, reading a note from a friend. You see their faces, you see their stories, and it makes it very unique, and it makes you feel like they're telling you, like the viewer's a friend. The viewer is just right there with them. So I think that's.
Well, I love to tell stories, so I totally get that,
Sure.
and I love to share people's stories like yours. But I guess as a photographer, did you ever do videos of any of these people, or was it always just a photo and then have them write? And did you edit any of them at all, or ask them to change anything at any point?
The stories? Sure. Some of them, they sat down, especially when I was traveling. Initially when I was traveling, maybe I was with them for an hour and a half. So like that would be like we do the photo shoot, they do the writing, and that was it. Some of them wrote it straight through. First draft, we used it. Some of them wanted to take more time. I asked them all to write a draft right at the beginning, just because then something was out there. And I've taught writing, and I'm sure you have too. It sounds like from your workshops, and just getting it out there is always the first step. And you can do what you want with it later. If you want to change it, if you want to edit it, that's absolutely fine. But as you know, and this is one of the things I do in workshops with other women is really letting go of the critic and the perfectionist. And so you don't have to tell it exactly the way you want it to be first draft. You just want to get it out there. And sometimes the first draft actually is the best. And you don't really need any editing.
Yes.
Right. Sure. Sometimes right. Go ahead.
I was going to say, I think it's so important that we all really dig into our origin story, if that's what we want to call it, the stories of overcoming, resilience, courage, because we all have them. There are so many people who go out there and say, I'm just not that interesting, or I don't have a story, but I do believe everybody's got a story.
I agree 100% with you.
Yeah, and so it's like, and I think it's another way for people, whether you share, and I always talk about, you don't have to write it, you don't have to read it, you can draw a picture, you can paint, you can sing music, you can do whatever, dance it out. But there are ways to tell stories that share your strength and courage and resilience. And I think we need more of those to inspire other people, because there's so many people who silently deal with, the violence, abuse, addictions, family
Absolutely.
falling apart, a death of a loved one, and they feel so alone. So
Absolutely.
we need these stories so people don't feel alone anymore.
Absolutely. And I think the other piece of it is, one person could have, horrific trauma in their life, and for anybody who's like, oh my gosh, I don't know how they came back from that, and then they end up doing fine in their life. I mean, it's obviously it has impacted them, but they go on and they live healthy, productive, happy lives. And then sometimes people feel like, well, my story isn't mine isn't as bad as hers, or mine isn't as bad. My story isn't. But our pain is our pain. Whether it's whether it's a loss of an older person, it's expected, but it could still really, the grief could be unbearable. So I think that's important.
Right. I mean,
too.
I know people who've just been devastated at the loss of an animal. That is their furry children.
You're right. Absolutely.
And it's like, what? You're worried? But it is. It's a loss. Yeah. And how do we deal with those kind of situations? So
right. And
I'd sort of like to go ahead.
Oh, I said I was going to say I think expressive arts, and I know that's part of your story too, is a really good way to deal with it, whether it's writing, whether it's drawing, whether it's painting, whether it's sculpture, poetry, singing. I think that's a way, whether you want to do it for anyone else or just for yourself, I think that's a really good way to move through that.
Right. How did you get started in photography?
I got started in photography when I was a teenager, and I had my father had set up a dark room in our home, and he kind of got into it for a little bit, and then he just kind of like went back to golf, and And so I was really curious about it. So he had a friend of his who had taught him, showed me how to do it, and I just started getting involved, probably I was 14, 15, and working on the school newspaper and yearbook. But one thing I learned really early in my life is that the meditation in the dark room, the kind of the peacefulness, can also be a really good coping skill. So I found a lot of solace in that through my adolescence.
Oh, I love that. Now, I got my first camera when I was 16. My parents, we were going to Europe, and they gave me an Ansco camera. And you remember those pictures were always, 2x3 in those days? Those were the prints you got. And I know I took pictures of laundry hanging all over the world. I took pictures of dead logs because when I would go walking in nature, I was attracted to dying logs for whatever reason. But, over the years, certain things are still the same. Certain images attract me or not. But my passion, I found there's such a meditative quality when I take photographs of nature because I'll take close-ups. To me, they're intimate portraits. And the light coming through.
I noticed that you posted beautiful flowers. And I think I talked to you a while back, and I actually featured some of your flowers on the Photo Explorations Facebook page. They're beautiful.
Thank you.
Chicago Botanical, right?
Gardens, yes. Thank you. Yeah, and so for me, it's like it is. You talk about cathartic, soulful, spiritual. It is tapping into nature in a way that just lifts my spirits, and I hope it lifts other people's spirits as well. So
I agree. I think it can be very therapeutic photography. Absolutely.
I do. And the first, it's interesting. I had not heard of it as therapeutic until, I don't know, a number of years ago. I was looking at an article, and there was a woman in Italy who was using creativity. She was letting people take photos in prison. In the Italian prisons, women were taking self-portraits with her. They were working with her so they could express who they are, where they are, and where they wanted to go. And it was like, wow,
that's
what
great.
We
call that therapeutic. Right. We call it therapeutic photography or social photography. Now, if it's a therapist doing it, if it's a psychotherapist doing it, and it's done in more of a therapeutic setting with therapeutic goals, that might be referred to as phototherapy. So there's actually a really great discussion on Facebook by Judy Weiser, I connected with many, many years ago, and she's what I would like to kind of say, like the mother of phototherapy, one of the mothers of phototherapy, and she has a book out too as well on phototherapy. Oh,
well, that's good to know because I didn't know that. Thank you for that resource. So let's talk about your book, Photo Explorations, A Girl's Guide to Self-Discovery Through Photography, Writing, and Drawing.
I'd be happy to talk about this. So this is a workbook.
Tell us about it. What is your favorite question to ask them to explore?
So what I usually do, it's a workbook, and it's kind of set up in kind of past life, current life, and future life. So one of the assignments is for them to make a collage that tells the story of their life, but to limit it. So there's 10 limited to 5 or 10 photos that really tells the story of their life up to now. So that's kind of the first assignment. So sometimes it's them, bringing copies of photos into the workbook, collaging, and sometimes it's the reader, going out on assignments and taking photographs in their life. Or if they prefer, they don't have to use photographs. They can do it through drawing. They can use, images from magazines even as kind of metaphors. So, so that's kind of how it starts. And then there's also a series of self-portraiture in that. So way before the selfie was invented, there was the self-portrait. And I encourage the readers to do that in a variety of ways. And you can take a self-portrait by, in a mirror. You can take a self-portrait. Obviously, you can do it like a selfie, but you could, set your camera on a table. You can, if you're using a camera besides your cell phone, you can, set it on a tripod, and to really, through the photographs, show different aspects of them. So one of my favorite ones, I would say, would be the one that asks for their real or authentic self, and to ask them to take a picture showing that. And it doesn't even, they can enlist other people to help them do that, but the person in the photograph is actually the one that's in charge. the person who, if it's, even if someone else pushes the button, the subject is saying, well, here's what I want. I want to be standing up, leaning next to this tree out in nature. I want to be looking away. They create this photograph. And then I ask them to print it out and put it in the workbook. And then there's this series of writing prompts based on their photographs. So there's there's 10 chapters in it, I believe, with different assignments. And they vary. Some has to do with what they want in their future. Some of it has to do with kind of highlighting a positive skill or talent that they feel like they have. So really, it's about empowering girls. I mean, really, these same assignments can be done by adults. They can be done by anyone. And I do workshops all over. I've done them all over the country with girls and women, and I do with the Girl Scouts. Whoever. These same tools can be used, but really, it's just about figuring out who I am, and building self-awareness and giving them a voice and telling their stories.
I love it. So what would you say is your favorite photo that you've ever taken?
That is hard to pick, but I think some of the black and whites in the exhibit are really my favorite ones. So, and those were done on film. Those were done using Hasselblad medium format on film, and then many years later now I'm just using digital SLRs, and really the quality is really good. The quality is so good on now digital. I was one of the people that didn't want to go to digital many years back, but it makes our life so convenient. And actually my phone camera is wonderful too. So the original photographs in the exhibit, by the way, are all black and white, beautiful prints, and then the follow-ups are color digital. So to kind of, show the old and the new. That was done. I love it. Thanks.
I think that's great. So what would you love to be your legacy? I mean, you're an artist, you're a writer, you're a teacher, you're a mentor. What would you love your legacy to be?
I would like it to be that people learn more about themselves and were able to tell their stories, from the workshops, the books, from, using creative arts. If I can help other people, or even in a clinical setting, if they can learn more about who they are, what they want in life, and where they want to go, and if expressive arts can help them, I think that would be great.
I love that. So how long is the art exhibit in Chicago, and where's it going next?
It is currently there through October 7th, 2018. It's the Chicago Public Library, the Harold Washington Library Center, and it is in Congress Corridor on the first floor. And they're open 7 days a week, by the way. Call for library hours or on your Google them. As far as the next stop, it is scheduled for still talking with some Midwestern universities, which it's been doing. Been popular with universities because I think college age is a time when oftentimes people are away from their home, away from their parents, away from their family for extended periods of time, and they're starting, maybe everything went great in high school, but they're starting to maybe have some challenges and having to figure out how to work through things. So I think the inspiration from hearing other people's stories and how other people got through hard times is important. I think also universities are very interested in academic resilience. Sometimes our students feel so much pressure to get straight A's, and maybe they did go all through high school in honors classes taking straight A's, and then they get to university and they're challenged, and maybe they fail a test, and that can be very devastating. So working on resilience, I think, has become a pretty important topic in our culture in many ways. So that's kind of.
Do you speak as well on that?
I do workshops. So yes, I speak about it, but mostly I speak through the workshop. Usually it's or through the exhibit. Like maybe I'll give a talk about the exhibit and the stories, but oftentimes I also offer a workshop in conjunction with it or without the exhibit. So that's what the Photo Explorations, which is the name of the book, is also the name of my workshop. So I'm the director of Photo Explorations, and we offer workshops using a variety of creative techniques for self-awareness.
Okay. And where can people find your book, Photo Explorations?
Well, if you go to my website, there should be a link, but it's on Amazon. clgphoto.com is my website. There's information on Facebook is at Photo Explorations or at Resilient Souls, and also on Instagram. So,
okay, I'm going to ask you,
places.
In the remaining time, is there one more story you want to share of somebody from the exhibit that would leave us with a powerful message?
Sure. I'll talk about Mayana, which is another Chicago one. Well, what I like is, there's so many. But what I think is cool about that is when I met her, I was doing a story, actually for St. Louis Magazine, just do a feature story on her because she had been befriended by a reporter, and she was about 14 at the time. She had come here from Bosnia, and the family was living in a small apartment, crowded. They had left Bosnia, and she had a pretty traumatic childhood. Came here. She had lost her father. She came here with her mother and her mother's sister and the grandmother, and they were all living in a small apartment. The mothers and aunt were working in factories, and meanwhile, she ended up befriending this reporter who helped her get into a private school here. She went on to go to university. She ended up went into graduate school. She lived in Chicago many years and was, professional job, married. And then when I found her again, her mother was still in this area, and she was coming back to have to bring the baby back to show people. So I met her here, and then I went to visit her mother, and her mother was in this big, beautiful home, and then the sister was in another beautiful home right next door, and they were living the American dream. Like I had seen them. The family was living the American dream. Mayana was living the American dream. And the other piece of synchronicity to the whole thing is she was actually, when she first moved back to St. Louis, she was living in an apartment right where I live, and then she ended up buying a house a block away from me. So that's kind of fun.
Oh, talk about synchronicity. Yeah.
Right. So I have a neighbor who is in the exhibit as well. So that's kind of fun. But there are many stories.
I love that. There are many stories, and thank you for sharing these today. I love them,
are welcome.
And I encourage everybody to go see the exhibit, get a copy of the book, and pay attention to when she's offering fabulous workshops, or if you know a school or, a place where you think the exhibit would be a perfect fit. I know she'd appreciate it, and so would I, and that's what creative activists do. They collaborate. They share bold visions. So thank you so much, Cathy. I really appreciate you being here today. Thank you.
Thank you, Ray, and thank you for the work you're doing.
Thank you.